So we are now officially starting this event. Excellencies, dear colleagues, welcome to this event organized by the Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat with the support of the Geneva Environment Network. You have joined the first of two event series aiming to present the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund's first call for applications. This first event aims to inform applicants about the global framework of chemicals, as well as the eligibility criteria for applying for funding. The global framework on chemicals for a planet free of harm from chemicals and waste that was adopted in September last year at the 5th International Conference on Chemicals Management acknowledges the pollution and waste crisis as a third environmental planetary crisis alongside the crisis of climate change and the crisis of nature and land biodiversity loss. It complements indeed the global deals that set agreed goals and targets to tackle the triple environmental planetary crisis that the humanity currently faces. As we have indeed the Paris Agreement for climate change, the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework for nature, land, and biodiversity loss, and now this global framework on chemicals for pollution and waste. The Global Framework on Chemicals Fund, launched alongside the framework at the same conference, supports countries in implementing this international agreement, agreement that guides countries and stakeholders in jointly addressing the life cycle of chemicals, including products and waste. The fund launched its first call for application on 1st of October for an implementation period of up to 3 years, as you will hear soon from the colleagues. We are joined today by the head of the Secretariat of this new framework and her colleague, to inform applicants about the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund, as well as the eligibility criteria for applying for the funding. We'll be sharing during this session a series of documents and links that will help you understand better the process. Before we begin, let me remind you that the documents presented, the summary, as well as the video of this event will be made available as usual on the webpage of this event. Throughout the event, you can raise questions by using the Q&A box, and you have there slides showing you how to access this Q&A, and those will feed the discussion during our Q&A session. And I also would like to add that the transcript is also available in 100 languages, as you can see on this slide, and you can see also how to access it. So now, to formally welcome you and formally start this event and introduce you to the topic of our discussion, I'm delighted to give the floor to Ms. Jacqueline Alvarez, the Chief of the United Nations Chemicals and Health Branch. With that, Jacqueline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me correctly? Yes?
Yes, we can.
So, good day to all of you. You are listening to us from all over the world. And as you heard Diana a few moments ago, a year ago, we were thrilled the Global Framework on Chemicals was adopted. Today, we are thrilled that we are having the first launch of the fund available for all of you to look at what it is possible in your country, what you need to do. In 1 year times, we will be having all of those projects that you are today designing ready to start making a difference in your country. You will hear later today that we have seed money for this fund. It looks like a lot, 28 million, but in reality, we are looking at scaling up that funding very, very strongly together with you. We look at high impact projects applications. What that is depends on you. It depends on what you need. It depends on the strategic objectives of the framework that it's our, at this moment, guiding principle and guiding lines. We need to really leverage the transformation that it is needed in this agenda. And we are, as you know, targeting to scale up, to have those programs that are needed for everybody to say in 2030 and in 2035 that we are making a difference, that we are really capturing and ready to say these targets have already been phased out. We are moving forward into that direction. So with this, and because the intention of this webinar is to really share with you the different elements of the application and where we are. I'll pass the floor to my colleague, Kay, that as Diana was saying, she is leading the secretariat, and she will, together with Rebecca, during this morning, share with you all of those things, the must knows for you. So thank you.
I thought I'd start by giving a little bit of an overview of the global framework on chemicals. So, as Jacqueline was saying, about a year ago in September, we did finally agree this exciting new framework, which has 5 strategic objectives, 28 targets, and was agreed by different stakeholders and different sectors. We also agreed a bond declaration, which has stepped up the commitment of high-level officials, ministers, and heads of delegation to take action in this very important area, the third pillar of the triple planetary crisis. And then finally, a global framework fund was set up, which now has $28 million in it. As a reminder of the 5 strategic objectives, we have one around legal frameworks, institutional mechanisms and capacities. Another one very much about data and information, making sure that not only is it generated, but it is available and accessible to all stakeholders to be able to make informed decisions. Thirdly, the issues of concern are understood, identified, not only prioritized, but also addressed. There was a lot of discussion about moving forward, innovation, sustainable solutions to make sure that work is done along the value chain for safer alternatives. And then finally, a focus on enhancing the implementation and effective resource mobilization and partnerships. In terms of the 28 targets, here I've given just a selection from the main groupings of those targets under the different strategic objectives. So as we see the targets, one of the key ones that we have is making sure that countries do have very strong, robust legal frameworks in place that are appropriate for the country and the institutional capacity therein. That's an incredibly key part for making sure that there is the safe and sustainable management of chemicals globally. There were then a group of targets in the B area, which did look again at the amount of information that we have in materials and products throughout the value chain, calling on companies as well and businesses to make sure that we have that transparency of information. A group of D targets were agreed, speaking much more to different stakeholders, to the businesses, talking about chemical footprinting, talking about making sure that there are strategies and identifying where information and about chemicals of concern that are being used are disclosed to enable investors to make strategic and sustainable decisions in the future. And then finally, there's a need to understand that we need to work very closely with many communities, both health and labour, but also climate change and biodiversity, because many of the solutions that are required for the challenges that we face are common and have impacts on each other. So in terms of what's been happening with the Global Framework on Chemicals, in terms of the implementation and the resolutions, a lot of work has been happening with the IOMC organisations, those participating organisations that are involved in the sound management of chemicals and waste. And a number of surveys have gone out and webinars to co-create implementation programs and to address the economic and industry sectors that have not been our traditional stakeholders. In the framework, we talk about implementation programs around regulatory frameworks, working down value chains, and also about mainstreaming with sustainable development objectives and interlinkages. On measurability, there is an ad hoc open-ended working group that has been going forward and met several times. It has its next meeting on the 13th of November and has been making progress, not only clarifying where we are with our existing and measured indicators, but also looking to where we need to be measuring new indicators in the future to again assess the progress towards the targets under the framework. Finance is incredibly important in terms of not only recognizing the finance that's required to address the problems that we have and look at the flows in the system, but also to how to address the financial sector in terms of being able to make those sustainable decisions in the companies that are producing chemicals or companies using chemicals that can be harmful to human health and the environment. The Food and Agriculture Organization has been taking a leading role with other international organizations to look at highly hazardous pesticides and has been working hard to set up a global alliance on this front to take forward this very important area that impacts many countries globally. Again, regulatory frameworks is key. These are coming in under implementation programs, and it's incredibly important that we have strong regulatory frameworks in order to manage the chemicals that are around us globally. And then finally, we are making progress on the Gender Action Plan and collecting information from our stakeholders on the actions that are happening globally to incorporate that into an inclusive plan for the next stage. And this is where we are in terms of our road to the first conference under the Global Framework on Chemicals. We launched the fund on the 1st of October. We will be assessing the applications, or rather the executive board will be looking at the applications in March next year. And we're very much hoping that we'll be starting to make huge progress, and the first of those will be starting to come through by the open-ended working group, and the first agreements for those projects will come through then. The open-ended working group for the GFC will be happening in Nairobi on the 23rd to the 27th of June. We're hoping to make sure that we have an exciting agenda, and that again we've got a very inclusive growth mindset when we come to that, to make sure that we're making a considerable difference on the ground in implementing the actions for the vision of the global framework and working towards the first international conference. And so with that, I am now going to pass over to Rebecca Jadaska, who leads the work on the fund. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much, Kate. Can you give me the pointer just before I start? I'm very happy to be here today and talk to you more about the fund itself. So as was already said, the fund was established at the International Conference on Chemicals Management in Bonn in September 2023. And its overall purpose is to support countries in implementing the Global Framework on Chemicals. As Kay just said, we launched the first round of applications on the 1st of October, and the 4-month application period will close on the 31st of January next year. Before I talk about the ways to apply, just to give you a bit of a big picture, the fund has received contributions and pledges of approximately $28 million and is open to receive additional contributions. You can see the flags and logos of those countries and organizations that have contributed or pledged to the state. Thank you very much to these countries and organizations. The fund is governed by an executive board, which represents all UN regions, as well as the donors and contributors. This is a picture from the last meeting in June. And as we said, they will be meeting again in March and are in close contact with the Secretariat, which supports the functioning and administration of the fund. Let me now move to the strategic priorities, which were identified by the Executive Board and which are largely in line with the implementation arrangements of Resolution 5/8, which is one of the ICCM5 resolutions. So the strategic priorities are as follows. The first is strengthening national and regional capacities for the implementation of the global framework by promoting the development, implementation, and enforcement of enhanced national policies, strategies, and regulatory frameworks. The second one is implementing programs that promote the safe and sustainable management of chemicals and waste in economic and industrial sectors along the value chain. Then we have a third one on unlocking and securing funding for managing chemicals and waste. The fourth one is enhancing cooperation and coordination among those responsible for implementing international instruments and programs. And the final one to address issues of concern as well as cross-cutting themes. As Kay already mentioned, we're looking into different sectors, and we're also connecting the activities of the chemicals agenda with those of climate and biodiversity. The board has also identified a set of minimum and desirable criteria for applicants. This slide shows you the minimum criteria. So first of all projects need to be aligned with the global framework's vision, objectives, and targets. We also aim for projects that have a long-term capacity to support the management of chemicals and waste nationally, regionally, and internationally. Thirdly, projects should have a sustainable financing mechanism or show us a plan for ensuring the long-term sustainability beyond the funding received by the Global Framework on Chemicals Fund. Projects should also achieve for 25% of co-financing, which includes in-kind contributions. We want projects that create synergies with related initiatives, but not duplicating existing projects or programs. Gender mainstreaming is an important topic as well as safeguards. And as said before, we are looking for projects that involve sectors and stakeholders, which I will talk about later. The board has also identified a set of desirable criteria. This is very important to develop high impact projects. We do not have a very specific definition of high impact projects, but as Jacqueline said, this is very country or region specific. But the desirable criteria can guide you to identifying these. So one of the desirable criteria is to have a project that takes into account the priorities of the implementation programs identified in Resolution 5/8. We would also like to see projects that build on or complement previous initiatives. You will also see that this is asked for in the application form for you to tell us which projects are you also working on. Have you received funding from other bilateral or multilateral funds? And please share this in the narrative of your project. The fund is also interested in large-scale projects, possibly through established structures such as regional centers or other networks that are in place in your region. If your project is not regional, it should have the potential to be scaled up or to be a best practice for a region or even globally. We would also like to see projects that prioritize the involvement of major economic and industrial sectors and engage civil society, non-economic sectors, the private sector, and other relevant stakeholders. And as Kay said before, sustainable financing is a desirable topic as well. So we would like to see projects that link themselves with investments, with development banks, and support the private and finance sector to incorporate chemicals management in their approaches and reporting standards. You're probably very interested in who can apply for funding and what funding amounts are available. So the executive board has identified 2 different categories of applications. So the priority is governments from developing countries, least developed countries, small island development states, as well as countries with economics in transition. It's important that these countries have given formal recognition to the Global Framework on Chemicals. and we ask all of our applicants to provide support from their national focal point. On an exceptional basis, I stress this, civil society networks can apply for funding, and these will also need appropriate formal support by the national focal point. As I said before, the fund is also open to regional or multi-country applications. However, these funds will be managed by a single entity, and I will talk about that in a second, about how such a regional or multi-country application could look. In total, the fund provides financing from between $300,000 and $800,000 per project proposal, and projects can run for up to 3 years. We are open and we highly encourage proposals for a shorter project time. So if you have a project for only 1 year, you are more than welcome to also send us your application. It does not have to be up to 3 years. So we highly encourage that. And as I said before, each project should try to achieve 25% co-financing, which includes in-kind contributions, which are things like staff time, accommodation, office space, or other operating costs. So I already talked about the multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approach. So this is part of the global framework on chemicals. It's not only governments, it's many other stakeholders which are involved and which are needed to implement the framework. So I've tried to exemplify this on this slide, that we need stakeholders from health, environment, finance, labor, agriculture, and many other areas to work together. And we would like to see this in your application to exemplify to us how are you engaging with different stakeholders and from different sectors to really create a cross-sectoral impact. And if possible, please add letters of support from stakeholders from these different sectors to show that the application you're putting forward is relevant to all of them. As I said before, the fund is open to multi-country or regional approaches. However, each application will need to identify a lead applicant. This will be our main contact point within the Global Framework on Secretariat, Global Framework on Chemicals Secretariat. And we will be signing the legal agreement with this lead applicant. We will transfer funds to the lead applicant, who will then transfer them further to co-applicants, and this person is responsible for managing the complete project, coordinate all activities, and also report back to us. So we really want to stress that we would like to see multi-regional approaches, but that this comes with a certain degree of management. And we also want to see this in the application. So please describe how you will engage with the different co-applicants, and also describe the value that is added by a regional approach in your specific setting. You can find more information in a guidance document on the scope of the fund, which goes into depth of all of the things I've just presented. And we also have application guidelines that guide you through the complete application document. On our website, you'll be able to find all of the application forms which you will need to submit. All applicants will fill in the same application form. So there's a project description, asking for the project objective, the arrangements, activities, and a lot of other questions will be asked. There's also a project budget form which you will need to fill in. And as a minimum, we need letters of support by your focal point and the lead government, as well as letters of support of our project partners. If you're applying for a regional or multi-country project, or if you're applying by an organization which is not the government, we will need a few additional documents. So what happens next? As I said before, we launched the first round of applications in October, and we're currently holding these webinars, and we'll be doing further outreach. If this is interesting for your region, then please contact us, and we can arrange to do some more outreach in specific regions. And please mark in your calendars that the closing date for applications is the 31st of January next year. After that, the Secretariat will screen the applications and will forward them to the Executive Board, which will take its decisions in the middle of March next year. From that, we will notify the applications, and we will then ask applications to prepare any additional documents. You will see that you will need to prepare a logical framework, which is not part of the initial application, as well as possibly other documents depending on what type of application we've received from you. We aim to start signing contracts by the middle of next year, as Kay just said, and then we will work on further implementation arrangements with you. So please send us your applications via email in Word and PDF to the email address which you can find on the slide. And we also have a website where you can find more information about the Global Framework on Chemicals, as well as about the fund. And with that, I have finished my presentation. I would like to let you know that we will be holding the same webinar in English, French, and Spanish this afternoon. So there is simultaneous translation. The event will start at 2 p.m. Geneva time. And you can also join us tomorrow for the second part of the webinar, which is about completing the applications forms, and we'll go more into the details of how to fill in these forms. And with that, we've finished the information part and would like to open for the questions and from the audience.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. This was very clear. So clear that some of the participants already withdrew their questions, but you answered some of them. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat or in the Q&A. So let me start by bringing here 3 questions. The first one, some participants ask, where can I find the documents and the links? So as it was mentioned at the beginning of this event, everything is posted on the webpage of this event, but you also find all the information on the website of the framework, and the links have been shared in the chat by the colleagues who are sitting here in the room with us. So that one has been also already answered. There's another question asking if you have already received some applications. And maybe I can also bring you a second one from somebody joining from Ethiopia. Are the fund including all types of chemical waste disposal? This is from one was an KBD from Ethiopia.
So for the first one, no, we have not received any applications yet. But as I said, we've only opened the call for applications 4 weeks ago. We have heard from several colleagues and from several focal points who are interested in submitting an application. So there's definitely a lot of interest, but for now, we have not received any applications yet. I know that from our colleagues from the special program that this usually takes almost the complete 4 months, but I would like to encourage everyone who's interested to reach out to us as early as possible. So if you have any questions about your application, please don't wait until January, but please reach out to us at an early stage, as this gives us enough time to discuss those with you and to get back to you on time. So please don't send questions on the 26th of January, but try to be a bit earlier than that.
There are a few more questions that came on, but
yeah, and the question about chemical waste disposal. So yes, the Global Framework on Chemicals is basically an umbrella framework. It doesn't have a strong chemical by chemical approach, but is rather a broad umbrella following the 28 targets, which Kay mentioned in her presentation. So what we're looking at is basically systemic change. We don't necessarily want to see projects that are looking at one chemical very specifically, but more about systemizing chemicals management approaches from a broader view. Do you want to add to that, Kate?
So just to say, it's about the life cycle of the chemical. So that does include waste. Again, in looking at beyond the national. It might be high impact in a single country, but I think we're really trying to look at where we can build on the impact in a particular region. So if there is something to do with that about the waste part of the life cycle, then that's valid. And I urge you to look at the criteria that the executive board set in terms of priorities, both the desirable and the mandatory.
Thank you very much. There are a few questions here that are also linked. One is, are countries allowed to apply for more than one project? And then they would like also to know if the application needs to be routed through the national government, or if various stakeholders can submit it directly to the UNEP secretariat.
Yeah.
And then, there's another one related, which is very similar. Can we submit the proposal through the UN agency that works actively in the country?
So maybe one last addition to what Kay's just mentioned, that I've talked to a colleague recently who talked, for example, about e-waste, which contains a lot of chemicals. I think for us, it's important to have the link to chemicals and to explain why this is relevant for the global framework on chemicals. For the other questions, yes, countries may submit more than one project. However, each project needs to be supported by the national focal point, and we do foresee the national focal point to have a coordination function, so to look at the proposals and to encourage those to support each other. As I said before, the board is very keen on multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral approaches, so possibly it would also make sense to merge two project proposals into one, depending, of course, on the topics, because the executive board will, of course, also look at how the projects are distributed. They haven't put any cap or any priorities on it, but of course, depending on the amount, that might be something they would be looking into. Whether applications need to be routed through the government. So as I said, the national focal point, who is in the government, will need to sign the applications. However, you can send them to us directly. And regarding UN agencies, so we need to, or the UN agencies are not eligible for applying directly, but I put forward who is allowed to apply. So the UN agencies would need to provide a letter of support or confirm that they would support the implementation. However, we would like to receive the application from the eligible organizations which I put forward.
Maybe a clarification with this number of applications. Is it possible to send various applications on a country, for example, from a government, from a CSO, and a regional group? If yes, can the proposal be merged as one or separate? That's one of the questions that came in. And again, a lot of questions on multiple applications from a country. Is it going to affect the amount of funds for the country itself? So those are all questions coming up. And can NGOs from a region apply? How does it work for NGOs? Those are the questions that a few more are there, but let's start with that.
So I would say that the executive board are looking at this first year as a year of trying to make sure that they've got the right priorities, but they're very much open that it's sort of, I wouldn't say a pilot year, but they reckon they have said that they intend to review the approach for the second round of applications. So the executive board will be looking carefully about how the approach has worked, first of all. So I think no decisions have been taken really explicitly on numbers of countries, of what the impact is on the regions. All I would urge, and this is from experience that's happened with a special program, is that you do make a very high quality application. We do have very variable applications that have come in previously. And I think if efforts are made to put in an exceptionally good quality one, then that is more likely, that meets the criteria, that is more likely to then, I think, be looked favourably by the executive board. So it's about making sure that the time is spent to put in those high quality applications. No criteria have been set in terms of limiting countries or regions. I think the aim is to make sure that where we can have high impact and that there's opportunities to either build on existing projects, to really make sure that a difference globally is being made with this funding that we can then showcase to attract more funding to the pot.
There is a question: if you are currently implementing a second project, are you still qualified to apply, anticipating that the current one will end by the deadline of the application? Then there are a few questions on public-private partnership model, as some countries encourage, countries like Tanzania, for example, as it mentioned here in the chat. Is there any possibility to apply for such a project? And then if a government designates a delivery organization to implement the project, will the delivery organization sign the agreement with the fund? People are asking how it works, and receive the funds directly.
So
I think yes.
the second project.
So in terms of the cycle, I don't think there's anything that limits anybody that has an existing project. You can still put a new project forward. I don't think that's going to be a constraint. There's nothing in the rules that says that you can't. Public-private. So I'm not sure on this space. There's an element of co-financing. So whether that's the approach that wants to be taken, I think we'd have to just look at exactly what you mean in Tanzania, and maybe we need a separate conversation so that we don't give you misleading information about your question. I know that many countries do support public-private partnerships, but in terms of the fund, there are some small constraints when we're working with for-profit organisations that we have to be mindful of. So I think it might depend on the type of partnership that you're talking about. And I think we will promise to go away, and if we can contact you separately on that, I think that would be very helpful, and we'll try and reflect that in our frequently asked questions afterwards.
Yes. I would say the same for the regional NGOs. I think the regional projects are a bit more tricky. So please reach out to us and we can have a separate discussion on how to incorporate that in an application.
Very good. Sorry, there are so many questions. Is the project proposal does it have to be focused on a single strategic objective and several targets, or it can cover more than one strategic objective and several targets? That's one of the questions.
Yes. Oh, go ahead. You can ask more.
So a lot of questions about this. Who is the lead signatory, whether it's project implementing agency or national government, which we were discussing before. Some participants would also like to know if this project is with the low countries to establish monitoring and enforcement through the strengthening their capacity in terms of laboratory equipment and establishing the standard. And there was also somebody who asked earlier, please explain more about the 20% co-financing that you had mentioned.
Yeah. So the strategic objectives and targets of the framework are, of course, very important, and we ask about the link in our application form. You don't have to specify only one, and I think the objectives are broad enough to find references to all projects. But if there is not one specific target, for example, I think that is not a big problem. Regarding laboratory equipment and standards, we can talk about that in tomorrow's presentation as well. So there is a small amount for equipment. However, there are special UNEP regulations regarding equipment because it follows additional rules within the UNEP contract and agreement you will be following. I will also put that in our list of frequently asked questions, which we will come back to all of you as soon as possible. I think what's also important about all of these equipment and more specific questions is the narrative and really talking about why this is relevant for the project and how this will specifically contribute to a sustainable project that really has an impact within your region. And then co-financing was another question. So as I said, co-financing can of course be something with a public and private arrangement, where there is actual financing coming from a separate source, but we also use the definition or use in-kind contributions, which can be things like staff time or accommodation, office space, or other operating costs of your organization, which are commonly not covered by the fund.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Indeed, somebody was mentioning it would be good to have a FAQ, but you are preparing it, as you just mentioned.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mention that earlier, but we are preparing an FAQ where we will, where I'm taking notes now, and we will try to get back to all of the questions. And as Kay said before, some of these questions are things we will also need to get back to with the executive board. Yeah, because many of those things were decided in a meeting in Geneva, but now a lot of questions are coming from different colleagues, and they highly depend also on the country and regional context, of course.
So a few more questions came in. For regional projects, for example, regional intergovernmental bodies, can those regional entities send the application, or does it have to be submitted by a government? So this still needs clarification. And then there's also an interesting question here. As the framework has a broader scope, how can we avoid overlapping of the activities under the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions while planning to strengthen the convention's implementation?
Yeah, so the regional projects, as I said, there needs to be a lead applicant, and this is someone from a country, and there will need to be support from that country's national focal point. So even if you have a regional approach, then please decide for a country that is going to support this approach. If this does not, or if this is something that does not apply to your organization because it has a different arrangement, then please send us an email and we will guide you through the appropriate process. For avoiding overlap to BRS, so as some of you may know, the BRS Secretariat Minamata Special Program and a few Jeff colleagues are also in this building, and we're in close contact with them, and they are aware of this fund. We do want to use some of the established structures. For example, if it makes sense for you to implement a project through a BRS regional center, then we welcome that very much. The BRS specifically has quite a defined mandate in the Global Framework on Chemicals. Basically, as I said before, takes more of an umbrella approach. So they're not mutually exclusive, but should be supporting one another.
There's the same question for Mercury and Minamata.
Yeah, same thing. I think what is important, though, is to say that the executive board, of course, also knows about these different conventions and may possibly also look at complementarity. So we are asking you in your application to tell us whether you have any work which is funded by any of these conventions, or whether you have any other bilateral projects you're already working on. And please tell us in the narrative how the work of the fund will complement these, and how you can possibly learn something from another project, and how these work together.
Then there are questions about the kind of things that the fund can, the kind of projects that can be funded. So, for example, can we ask for training on the maintenance of incinerators as a request for funding? And then we have Tripiti Arora from IPAN South Asia Hub, who is I would like to discuss the possibility of regional projects. Do we need letters from all the respective local focal points, or just from the lead applicant country? She would also like to know how the fund transfer and distribution will take place in a regional project. and also any important points to keep in mind before developing such an application. And actually, so as Rebecca mentioned earlier, we invite you also to join us tomorrow, because there you will have also some more questions. And it's also to mention that the head of the special program will also be with us tomorrow.
Yes.
So there you can also have more answers.
Yes. So the training on waste incinerators.
I don't know.
Well, as I said, the executive board is going to make the decision, and I think this is also something that's very specific to a certain country or region. I think if it is within a greater narrative that fits to the global framework on chemicals, and you can put this forward in your application, then the executive board will consider that and will look at it. I think we cannot develop a list of this is possible, this is not. I think it's very much up to your context and how you put this forward in your application. Regarding the regional approach, so as I said before, there will be a lead applicant, and this person will be responsible for signing the agreement with us, but also transferring the funds to other organizations or other co-applicants. So the lead applicant will need to have the capacity to channel these funds. And we ask for supporting letters by all of the co-applicants as well, just to ensure that the implementation organizations are in place. And this is, I think, something very important for developing such a project proposal. So be clear on what is the governance and the project arrangement in a regional project. And please consider, given these these management obligations, what is the actual added benefit of this regional project. We do think there are a lot of benefits, but this is important to put forward in your application.
So another question on something specific on what the fund could cover from Tanzania, mentioning that one of the big challenges in developing countries is the proper and sustainable disposal of hazardous chemicals and wastes. So will the scope of the project funding cover the aspect of establishing a proper sustainability waste disposal facility? And
yeah, so just on the waste, I think we just have to take note of then the requirement that the executive board said about being high impact and contributing to the vision and the objectives of the global framework. It's a global framework. I think it's incredibly important in a country that hazardous waste is disposed appropriately. If there's something that needs to be set up in a region regarding hazardous waste that's revolving around a network and transport or some sort of collaboration, I think that those sorts of approaches would be the sort of thing that the executive board were thinking of in terms of trying to fund, rather than something which is incredibly important for one particular country, but isn't having a global or a regional impact, if you like, in terms of this money. Again, to remind you that the pot of money is nearly around 28 million, but and it will be interesting to see how much you can really do with $800,000 in that context. But yeah, I'll just leave it there about the scope of where this fund will be sitting in terms of in relation to the Global Environment Facility or other multilateral funds.
There was again the same questions, but you have already answered about the signing of the agreement. If a government designates a delivery organization to implement the project, will the delivery organization sign the agreement with the fund? So that seems to be of concern for some of the attendees. And then there's also a question about the language of the documentation that must be sent to access this funding.
Yeah.
And you were touching before that you are also organizing events this afternoon in other languages. So maybe this is a good moment to remind that also.
Yes, so we kindly ask you to submit your applications in English only. We do, as I said, have these webinars in French and Spanish this afternoon, which will also be recorded. And we've also made the application guidelines as well as the guidance document on the scope available in these 3 languages. But for now, all applications and the further correspondence with the Secretariat will be in English.
There is an interesting question about how much is allowed for management and overhead costs.
Yeah, so projects should aim for 5% of operating costs for the complete project. And we will talk about that tomorrow as well.
Can you just remind the percentage so that make sure that they have clearly heard?
5%.
5%, okay. There are a few questions coming up, but that have already been answered. But as you were mentioning, Rebecca, you are preparing this this FAQ and all the questions that have been posed here will be answered in that document. So there's another question from Ethiopia. If you could elaborate more on how we can engage the industry stakeholders in this project. We already touched on it, but for instance, is that possible to prioritize industries with serious issues and to make them to establish sound management of chemicals and waste?
Yes, I think we're also looking at new opportunities, new possibilities. As I said, the global framework in itself is very much multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder. So any new approaches possibly that might work in your country to engage with industry, for example, are very much welcome. Yeah, I think that's all I can say for now. Once again, it's about the narrative you put forward, about why this is the best approach or why this is a very promising approach in your country. But as Kay also said before, we do need all of these different stakeholders on board. So if you can show in your application how you are planning to engage with them, that would be very good.
So 2 other interesting questions. Is it possible for the Basel Convention centers to apply for funding of regional projects under the fund? And also, what is the scope for accounting the taxes, the VAT and general sales taxes in budgets?
Okay. So for the first question, yes, as I said before, the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention Centers, regional centers, are allowed to apply, and the executive board has said that they think that this is also an appropriate mechanism to have these established centers already working in these spaces.
The government,
Yeah, but subject to support by a national government. For the VAT and general sales question, for now, I cannot give you an answer to this question. I think this is very, very specific.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, there is another interesting question. So how many countries can be together to a application can join together?
So there's no limit on it, but I think in a way that the the amount available will be the limit, because the more countries you involved, I think there's going to be administrative overheads, and it's going to be quite complicated depending on the structures. I think it depends whether you're bolting this fund onto another bigger project, perhaps. So there's no definitive answer to it, but I think you just have to look at about how you distribute funds, what will each country then receive. The more countries you have, potentially the less they will receive, or depends on how you want to organize it. There is nothing in the guidance that says that there's a limit on the number of countries that can apply.
So tomorrow we are meeting at the same time, 10 a.m. Geneva time, and the link has been shared in the chat. So don't hesitate to also register to attend that event, or share it with colleagues that could be interested in joining. As mentioned by Rebecca earlier, you will get more information on how to develop your application, and the head of the special program will also be with us for that. So I see that less questions are coming in, but we still have a new question. If different applicants, this was also somehow answered before, but if different applicants from a country are planning similar activities, proposed measures, should the national focal point approve, sign them?
Well, as we said before, I think the focus should be on having high quality applications. So in most cases, I would advise countries to put together their forces and also to show that they're making a strong commitment to having a strong application with different stakeholders involved, with different sectors involved. Again, it depends on your national context, of course, but we highly encourage the focal point to have a close look and to connect those applications and avoid any duplication.
And just something I think that will be covered tomorrow is that there has to be a legal agreement, and we can only have that legal agreement with one entity, which will be the a country or potentially somebody from the civil society network by exception. So that is the constraining factor, I think, and why we need it to go through, funneled through an individual.
There is also a question on the eligibility criteria and application procedures for academic institutions seeking funding from the fund. So is it still compulsory to approach the focal point?
Yes, it is still compulsory to approach the focal point. And I think for academic institutions, they do qualify under the broad definition of civil society networks, subject to further documentation and founding documents. But as I said before, there's one set of application forms which apply to all different applicants, and there will always need to be a support by the focal point.
So for all stakeholders, they go to the national focal point. So that answers another question that was here. There's another question asking if education for chemical practice and urgent response can be consideration for the fund.
I think it's a similar question to the one we had before. I think it's not for us right now to include or exclude any specific activity. I think it's more looking at how this fits into the broader picture of implementing the global framework on chemicals. So for us, it's important that you put this forward clearly in your application and you show why your specific activities are relevant to the outputs and outcomes of your project proposal.
Perfect. I think we are now at 3 minutes to 11. Maybe we can start closing this event. Maybe we could have some reactions from UK on the questions that we received as a closing, and then we will make some announcements.
Yes, so first of all, I'm very pleased that there have been so many questions. I think this is a learning process, and I can assure you that where we're uncertain, we will go back and we will check and try and make sure we've got the appropriate response in the frequently asked questions, which we will share with all of you that have attended. We are on a bit of a learning journey with the fund, and we are making best efforts. So we urge you to work with us as a secretariat, and we will give you to the best of our knowledge, the right answers. But as I say, this first year is a bit of a learning experience, but watch this space.
Very good. So coming next this afternoon, some events in other languages. Tomorrow, a new session providing you more information on, this is the session of today, so it's not the session of tomorrow, but the session of tomorrow is on the guidelines on completing the application for the fund. So don't hesitate to join us again tomorrow. We will be, as I mentioned, also joined by the head of the special program. So an important space to answer your questions. And very important to mention also is this FAQ that will be produced by the end of this week and should soon also be available.
Yeah.
So with that, we are now closing this event. I just wanted to give to your attention also because that could be of interest for this community, that we have a few more other events coming up. We are very busy in the road to Busan with a lot of events, launching new initiatives or discussing important elements for this treaty. We have also a few other events coming up in the to celebrate our 25th anniversary, the 25th anniversary of the Geneva Environment Network. So we would like again to thank you all to have joined us today. And we look forward, if you have more questions, to see you again tomorrow. And we hope that this session has been useful. And we look forward also of making the session of tomorrow of interest for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.